Welcome to A Magical Life, Health, Wealth and Weight Loss. I'm your host, Magic Barclay, lead practitioner at Holistic Natural Health Australia and #1 best-selling author. In this podcast, I aim to give you practical tips on how to accelerate and sustain your health, increase your financial, spiritual and emotional wealth, and to look at something that haunts many of us needlessly, weight loss. In some episodes, I'll have guests available to give you even more tips, but in others, the floor is yours. Drop us a line at A Magical Life Podcast on Facebook and let me know what you would like to know more about. Now, sit back and enjoy, because it is time for you to create and truly discover a magical life. Welcome back to A Magical Life. I'm your host, Magic Barclay. Today, Katie Wrigley joins me. Katie has spent the bulk of her adult life suffering. Her answer to that was to run from herself by plunging deeply into denial and numbing herself however she could through a demanding career, drugs, binge drinking, and more. She suffered with chronic pain for more than 8 years. Suffering was her norm, until she was rendered disabled by all of the denial and numbing by the time she was in her early 40s. Enough was enough, and Katie wanted her life back. She tried many healing modalities with varying levels of success, and in 2020, she was introduced to the system that finally allowed her to harness the power of her mind to heal, Cognomovement. Katie fully embraced Cognomovement on a personal and professional basis and became certified in early 2021. Katie didn't only get her life back, she created a better life than she thought was possible. Now she teaches others how they can achieve a similar outcome for themselves. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much, Magic. It's such a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you. And, we don't often talk about pain. It's something that I guess as humans, we don't want to admit the weakness. And as you mentioned in your bio, pain can really take over and affect everything. And the techniques that we run to numb, as you did, they don't fix anything, do they?
No, they really don't. They give you temporary relief, but it doesn't touch on the root of things. And I know you're really big on finding the root of things yourself, Magic, as part of your own work.
I am. And as someone who's had chronic pain, I can really relate to, we just think it's something we either have to live with or something we have to numb, and really looking for where it's stemming from. Why is it happening? That is key. So I'm so glad we're going to have these conversations today.
Thank you. Me too. And I find it interesting that you said, sometimes we perceive pain to be a weakness. And what I found as pain becomes part of the identity, we actually shift that to have it as evidence that we're stronger. And we start to compare ourselves to people who don't have pain and, I'm doing what they're doing and I have pain. And it becomes a point of strength. And when that happens, it gets a little trickier to be able to shift and find your strength in other places and areas.
So true. Now, I ask all of my guests the same 3 questions, and everyone gives me such a different answer. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your take on things. And so your first one is, what can your expertise do to accelerate health? Not just physical, but also emotional and spiritual health.
Oh, I love that question. So Cognomovement at its premise is, the premise of it, I should say, is that the body is expressing for you what the mind cannot. And so the power of this ball, which we can't see because it's audio, but I encourage you, we'll tell you where to go look and see what Cognomovement's about at the end. But this ball in itself is meant to activate the brain. And what this does is it allows you access to the subconscious mind, and you do this through the body. And the amount of information our subconscious mind processes versus our conscious mind it is amazing how many things you find in there that are running as subconscious patterns that work against working on your health, working on your spirituality, working on your emotions. It goes against that. And there's even just on the emotional and physical component, for every experience of physical pain, there's an emotion attached to it. So with Cognomovement, we feel that as much as it is in the physical body, we focus on it. And then through that focus, you start to find answers, or you can make sense of the pattern, and you find where this came from, why you're holding on to it. And as soon as you see it, now you have a choice. You can keep it, which most people do not want to, or you let it go. And it's amazing when you let that go. And what that looked like in my own life is I went from waiting for a neurosurgery consult to canceling all my imaging literally in over a weekend. I did a 3-day event with Cognomovement, and it changed my life. So being able to access the subconscious mind and the body in the way that Cognomovement does allows you to accelerate anything you want to accelerate for yourself.
Wow. I love that answer. That is great. Now, we talk about wealth here, and people think it's just the financial wealth, but also personal and emotional wealth. I guess they all tie in together, because once we're happy within ourselves and we've reached some personal development goals, the finances come. But what would be your top 3 tips to creating wealth?
So top 3 tips is you want to connect emotionally to what you're getting out of that wealth, whether it's financial, whether it's spiritual, whether it's mental, wherever you're looking at wanting to have more wealth. What is that going to give you on an emotional level? And really connect to that. And don't stop at just one. Go a few levels deep. Like, so whatever you say, like wealth, oh, it'll give me peace of mind. I can pay my bills. Great. What does peace of mind give you? And go 6 or 7 levels deep and really see what it gives you on an emotional level and start to connect to that. We are very emotionally driven creatures. We are going to bring in logic, but we start with emotion, whether we realize it or not. So you start there and then spend time picturing, okay, this is what you're going to get emotionally, and start to visualize what your life looks like and feel it in the body. Is there anything in resistance to this wealth? For instance, if you've seen people maybe use money to try to control other people, that may not be the best feeling for you. And you're going to have resistance because you're not going to want to be someone who uses your money to control people. So that's going to be a subconscious pattern that could work against you accumulating more wealth. So you really want to pay attention to anything that feels in resistance or at risk to what you really want. And then you delete that pattern. My favorite way to do that, of course, is Cognomovement.
And our final standard question is around weight loss. And so many people dealing with pain gain weight because they feel they can't move. Maybe they're just completely stressed out by the pain, and that's a factor in weight gain or in drastic weight loss. We're not leaving that side of the equation out. So have you ever battled with your weight? If so, how did you win? And what can you offer the listeners, particularly around that stress component?
That's a great question, Magic. So I have battled weight for most of my adult life, and the battle actually ended with Cognomovement, as most of my internal battles did, either right before that time or when I was introduced to it. But one of the things I saw is part of what we want to do to serve ourselves is, instead of beating ourselves up for how our body got in that condition, whether we are denying food or whether we're eating it excessively, what was right about that situation for you? You know, oftentimes people who have been severely traumatized, especially in earlier life, they feel a lot more comfortable in a bigger body. And that was certainly part of my case. And most of my weight issues were I was heavier than I wanted to be. And it really bothered me. And so starting to explore what's right about the body. And this is something I love with Cognomovement, is we explore that. And I've actually done a weight loss program before with really great success, both as the student and then teaching it myself. And being okay with whatever is there. And then again, it's that emotional attachment. What is it going to give you? And if you've seen people in what you think is your ideal body, the one you want to be in, if you've seen them mistreating people, again, that can turn into a pattern that works against you that's going to keep the weight on there. And there's also a lot of times there can be stuck emotion. There can be angst, especially in the United States, women in particular, and men too, though. We're taught to shame our bodies from an early age. We're taught to cover them. We're taught to be ashamed of them. We're taught to keep them private. And that gets bigger and bigger as you get up, you start to grow up, you start to compare yourself to these magazines and these airbrushed ideals that aren't real. And that shame gets bigger and bigger. Being able to sit in that shame, break it apart, and feel better about your body, or maybe it's angst, or maybe it's resistance, or maybe people have tried to control you through your weight. But whatever your experience has been, feeling those feelings in the body, allowing them to be there, and then breaking them apart. One of the biggest reasons, or two of the biggest reasons that people tend to overeat is not feeling fulfilled, or they feel anxious. So they'll start to feel anxious and they'll go to the candy or the popcorn and they'll start filling up. Or maybe they just don't know what they want to do in life yet, or they just feel lost and they try to fill themselves up with food instead of with purpose. As soon as you figure out that that's one of the reasons that you're eating, you've broken apart half of its battle. And then you can start to then ask yourself, instead of that blind autopilot that your subconscious mind is taking to your refrigerator or your cupboard, you're now going to go, oh, this may be happening now. And am I actually hungry in this moment, or is this something else? And again, you have the choice of what you want to do in that moment. So that would be what I'd recommend is spend time on what was right and where and how you got into the body that you're in now, attached to what you want it to look like, remove anything that's in resistance to that, and continue to really find places to help lower your anxiety, to raise your feeling of fulfillment that don't come from food. Unless, of course, cooking is your nature, in which case, cook away, but potentially monitor how much you're actually testing along the way as you do that.
Great answer. Love it. Okay, look, that's all our official questions. Now, I want to dive into what is Cognomovement? Exactly what can the listeners expect? Because, you've mentioned it several times and they're going, what is that? I need to know.
So it is a mind-body system that is a way to be able to change the brain through the body. So when you talk about someone who has chronic pain, there have been physical changes that have happened in the gray matter. One of the statistics I've come across repeatedly is that people have been in chronic pain for, it didn't even actually give a time period. And chronic pain is defined by 3 to 6 months of unending pain without any break. That's when it becomes chronic. It goes from acute to chronic. And when we get to that state, that becomes more complex, and we actually lose 11% of the gray matter in our brain. That's the equivalent of 10 to 20 years of aging. So that is why pain touches every part of your life. But the good news is that pain is created in the brain. It's experienced in the body, but it's created in the brain, which means it is real. Your experience of pain is real. I both approach and try to stay away from the fact that pain is in your head, because it is in your head. However, it doesn't mean that it's not real. And that's really important to understand. Your experience is absolutely real. Cognomovement at its premise, it's going to, because it activates the brain. And let me just back up a second, explain the way that pain works. We have a pain receptor in the body that's going to travel through the peripheral nerves at whatever point it may be. Maybe it's your knee or your shoulder or your back or your neck or wherever it may be. Maybe it's just a toe. But that pain receptor goes off, goes to the peripheral nerve, to the spinal column, up to the brain, saying, hey, something hurts down there. Brain's like, you're right, it hurts. That starts to create a loop. When you're in chronic pain, that loop stays constant. The pain receptors never get a break. The nerve endings never get a break. Cognomovement gets in the middle of that. So, and it allows you to shift your perception and your perspective, which can completely alter your experience of pain. And it also, because you're activating the brain, it also activates your body's own natural ability to heal. So it creates physical changes in the brain and to the body as well. And we do this, it's a bunch of different modalities, plus itself, it's its own modality. The modalities are stacked on top of each other. So it has cross-body movement, which is one of the ways we learn. It has an eye movement component that's very similar to EMDR. There's a tapping component similar to EFT. We have a little bit of Chinese medicine in there, a little bit of Sedona method, a little bit of a Gestalt theory, and it's all in its own piece. And so this focus on the body, instead of ignoring it, we get curious, we stay in it, we make it bigger. And by being fully in the pattern, that opens our mind to be able to see what else is part of this to allow us to break it apart.
So, what do the sessions look like with Cognomovement? Like, can people all around the world do it, or do you need to be there physically? What can people expect?
You can do it both virtually and in person. And I do both. I have some in-person clients and I have virtual clients. I'm in the middle of a program right now that's all virtual. So if the person, and they could actually be done without the ball too. The ball really completes the system, but any object you can watch with your eyes, the eye movements are really, really important. And there's a lot of things we do in there. And we actually activate all three ways we learn at the same time, the auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. So this actually makes these patterns much more longer lasting and much more effective because we're actually activating the brain in those ways. But it can be done in person or online. And I actually, first year and a half, I did Cognomovement. It was all virtual before I met anybody else because I started in the middle of safer at home time in our lives.
So, we've covered a fair bit in a short amount of time. I'm really interested to hear, is there something else that you feel the listeners need to hear?
You can accept the diagnosis without accepting the prognosis. A diagnosis can be a double-edged sword. And just because this is what's going on with you, it does not mean that you have to accept that. Your state of mind and what you decide you're going to do with whatever you were handed is going to be a much bigger factor in your outcome than what the doctor tells you. And I want you to be empowered to know that today. Above all else, you are the one in charge of the prognosis, not your doctor. You know yourself and your body better than your doctor was. You are literally the only person in the world who knows what it feels like to live inside your body. And please step into that power.
And as we've discussed here before on the podcast, a diagnosis is just a label, folks. Do not label yourself. You are not the diagnosis. You are a person who has been told they have something, or a person going through something, whether it be pain or autoimmune or whatever it is. It's just a label. It's not who you are.
Absolutely. That is worded perfectly, Magic. Absolutely. And, the emotional pain can be pain too. And in hearing something from a doctor can be painful. But it is just that. It's just a label. Doesn't have to apply.
So we've covered Cognomovement. We've covered a little bit about your journey. Moving forward, what does life look like for Katie Wrigley?
Oh my gosh. As you were reading my bio, I was kind of cringing and going, wow, I would not want to do these things now. My life is completely different. I feel fulfilled. My relationships are more fulfilling than I've ever had and stronger than they've ever had, both in my family and with friends and my partner. I have better focus than I've had. I have more joy. I do not have physical pain. I get a little voice from different parts of my body sometimes. Sometimes a shoulder will hurt. Sometimes a back will hurt. I'm able to resolve it in days versus 2 years ago where on a bad back day, I felt like I was throwing my left leg forward. And all I've done is focus on my health, utilize Cognomovement, and break apart these patterns that were keeping me in pain and understand what else was in that pain and letting go of the resistance that I actually could heal myself with my mind. I, for whatever reason, had a huge resistance to that back in the day because I had not been able to access that for myself. And then the day that I did, I was like, oh, it is possible. Oh, wow. And it was so liberating. And life is amazing now. I am excited to see what's going to happen on any given day. I'm excited to see what's going to happen on any given year. I'm going out and having experiences all the time. I just went to the Alaska, which is the biggest state in the United States, and It's quite far from where I live, and it was a trip I could not have even fathomed for myself 4 years ago. And I had a great time despite getting COVID when I was there. It was a wonderful trip.
Brilliant. Now, before I let you go, Katie, we love freebies. So what can you offer the listeners and where can they find it?
Ooh, I love freebies too. I have 2 freebies I can offer. So please, I invite you to go to my website, katiewrigley.com. That is KatieWrigley.com. And on the main page, you can download my free ebook. This ebook is around the 4 areas that we can impact for our chronic pain. And so the purpose of this is just to start to gather awareness and see what you know and what you don't know. And when you're able to master these 4 areas of impact, that's where you're unstoppable and you are totally the boss of your pain, and you won't have pain anymore by the time you become unstoppable. So that's the first freebie. And if you want to continue the call with me or this conversation, then I invite you to schedule a complimentary call. That will be at KatieWrigley.com/Cognomovement. You can read a little bit more and schedule a one-to-one with me straight away. It will reflect in your time zone wherever you are in the world.
Brilliant. And some great offerings there. Katie, thank you so much for joining us on A Magical Life.
Oh, thank you, Magic. It's my pleasure. You have one of my favorite podcasts, and I absolutely love your episodes. So it's been an honor to be on here. Thank you so much.
Oh, goodness. That is such a review. Thank you. And listeners, thank you for your time. As always, I strive to bring you the most interesting guests and some of the answers that maybe you would take years to find. I try and bring them to your listening ears today. So thank you very much, listeners. Go forth and create your magical life. Thanks for listening today. Please subscribe to hear future episodes, leave a review, and share this podcast. You can follow us on Facebook at A Magical Life Podcast or at Holistic Natural Health Australia. That's holistic with a W. You can find us on Instagram at Holistic Natural Health or at www.holisticnaturalhealth.com.au. That's where you'll access all sorts of articles, freebies, and more.